I learned the true cost of trusting family the night I unlocked my front door and realized my house no longer felt like mine. The lights were on when I hadn't left them on. Not bright, just enough to say someone had been careful. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen, steady and patient, like it had been running for a while. There were shoes by the entry that didn't belong to me. 2 pairs, one scuffed at the heel, one too clean like it had never been used for work. A suitcase leaned against the wall where I usually drop my keys. It was upright, intentional, placed. My hand stayed on the doorknob longer than it should have. That was the first snap, quiet, internal. The kind you don't hear until it's already happened. If you've ever had family treat you like you don't matter, like your space and your choices are optional, take a second to hit like and subscribe. These stories aren't entertainment for everyone. They're survival manuals for people who learned the hard way that blood doesn't mean boundaries. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me without making a sound. The click of the lock echoed louder than the dishwasher. My living room looked the same at first glance. Couch, lamp, coffee table, but something was off. The throw pillow had been moved an inch to the left. My mail stack was thinner. A picture frame had been turned slightly inward, like someone didn't want it staring back at them. That was the second snap. I walked toward the hallway and saw boxes stacked neatly against the wall. Not rushed, not chaotic. Labeled, folded tape edges pressed down with care. This wasn't panic. This was planning. Megan. My mother's voice floated out from the kitchen, calm, warm, like this was a Sunday visit I had forgotten. I didn't answer. Emily stepped into view instead. My younger sister, 32, unemployed. Barefoot on my hardwood floors like she belonged there. She held one of my mugs, the blue one, the one I didn't let guests use because the handle chipped if you washed it wrong. She smiled, not nervous, not apologetic, just relieved. "Hey," she said, "you're back early." That was the third snap. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It came out flat like a statement you make when you already know the answer and just want to hear how they'll lie about it. Emily shrugged and took a sip from my mug. Mom said it was already handled. Handled. Past tense. Decided. Closed. My mother appeared behind her, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had been folded perfectly in half. She looked pleased. Not excited. Pleased. Like she had completed a task efficiently. "You scared me," she said. "You should have told us you were coming home early." That was the fourth snap, the loudest one yet. "I didn't give anyone permission to be here," I said. Mom tilted her head just slightly, the way she always did when she was about to correct me without raising her voice. "Megan, don't start." "Start what?" "Defending my front door." Emily shifted her weight and glanced down the hallway toward the guest room. My guest room. The door was open. The light was on. My chest tightened before I even saw inside. My bedspread had been replaced. My spare dresser drawer was open. Clothes I didn't recognize hung in my closet like they'd always been there. Shoes lined the wall. A laptop sat on my desk plugged in. Charging. That was the fifth snap. Something in me broke clean. "You need to leave," I said. "Both of you. Now." Emily's smile disappeared. She crossed her arms. "Are you serious?" Mom stepped forward, close enough that I could smell the hand soap she liked. Lavender. Always lavender. "She doesn't have anywhere else to go," she said softly. I wasn't going to let my daughter sleep in her car. That was the gaslighting. Smooth, polished, wrapped in care. "She didn't ask me," I said. "She shouldn't have to." Mom replied. "Family helps family." Emily nodded. "It's not like you need the space." My hands curled into fists at my sides, not shaking, controlled. I could feel my pulse in my wrists steady and hard. "I'm calling the police," I said. Mom laughed. "Just a breath of it. Don't be dramatic." That word, dramatic, the sixth snap. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up my palm, bright, cold. I pressed the buttons without looking at them. "There are people in my house who entered without my consent," I said when the operator answered. "They're refusing to leave." Emily's face went pale. "You're kidding." Mom's jaw tightened. "Hang up," she said. Not loud. Certain. "No," I said. The wait for the sirens felt longer than it was. Mom paced. Emily cried. Not tears, frustration. The kind that comes when you realize your leverage is gone. When the officers arrived, they were calm. Too calm. They asked for IDs. They asked for proof of ownership. They spoke to me separately, then to them. No handcuffs, no raised voices, just procedure. I watched from the hallway as Emily grabbed her bags, moving slower than necessary, dragging her feet like that might change something. Mom followed, lips pressed thin, eyes sharp. At the door, she turned back to me. "This isn't over," she said. "You don't get to do this to family." That was the final snap, the one that didn't hurt, the one that felt like clarity. The thing people don't understand is that this didn't start the night I called the police. That was just the first time I stopped pretending. Long before sirens and paperwork, my life had already been narrowing away from my family inch by inch, choice by choice. Not because I hated them, not because of one big fight. It happened quietly, the way pressure builds behind glass until one day it cracks without warning. I learned early that in our family, love came with conditions. Help came with strings, and silence was rewarded more than honesty. Growing up, my mother didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her control was softer than that. Questions disguised as concern, suggestions framed as wisdom, disappointment delivered through long pauses and heavy sighs. If you pushed back, you weren't rebellious, you were ungrateful. So I learned to shrink. Emily never did. She moved through life assuming something would catch her. A job, a boyfriend, a bailout. When things went wrong, she didn't panic. She waited. Someone always stepped in, usually my mother. When I started working full-time, Emily was finding herself. When I paid my own rent, Emily was between places. When I saved for a down payment, Emily needed a little help right now. We never argued about it. That was the strange part. No screaming matches, no dramatic scenes, just a quiet understanding that my stability existed to soften her landings. So I stopped talking about my life. I didn't mention promotions. I didn't celebrate milestones. I learned that success made rooms colder, that every achievement landed between us like an accusation no one wanted to name. By the time I bought my house, I didn't throw a party. I didn't post photos. I told almost no one. Happiness felt fragile around people who mistook access for entitlement. The spare key was a mistake I didn't recognize at the time. I handed it to my mother on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my kitchen under the harsh white light above the sink. I remember the sound of the refrigerator kicking on behind us. I remember the weight of the key in my palm. "This is for emergencies only," I said. "Real emergencies. If I can't be reached. If something serious happens." She didn't argue. She didn't smile. She closed her fingers around it and nodded once. That silence fooled me. I thought it meant understanding. I didn't realize then that understanding and acceptance are not the same thing. A few months later, things shifted. It started small. My mother began stopping by more often. Not to sit, not to talk, to look. She walked through my house like she was inspecting something she might need later. She opened doors I kept closed. She lingered in hallways. Her eyes returned to the guest room again and again. One afternoon, she stood in the doorway and said casually, "No one should live alone in a house this big." It sounded harmless. It wasn't. I felt it then, that tightening in my chest, the quiet alarm. But I didn't confront her. I'd learned that intentions reveal themselves faster when you don't interrupt them. After that, the comments came more often. About safety, about loneliness, about responsibility, always soft, always reasonable, always aimed in the same direction. Emily never called me. That should have been the warning. I heard about her situation through a cousin, a throwaway comment at a family gathering. Things are rough for Emily right now. Not concern, not urgency, just information dropped into conversation like it would find its way to where it needed to go. It did. I felt her presence before she ever arrived, in the way my mother's gaze lingered on my spare room, in the way she asked questions about my schedule, in the way she began treating my house less like my home and more like a solution. Then came the work trip. I was supposed to be gone for 5 days. Inspections, meetings, long hours. I planned to stay the full week, but something felt wrong by the second night. A pressure I couldn't explain, the kind you don't ignore if you've learned what happens when you do. So I came home early. I didn't tell anyone. And when I opened my front door, I understood immediately what had happened. The house wasn't trashed, it wasn't chaotic, it was occupied. Boxes stacked neatly, shoes aligned, my space rearranged with care, like someone wanted to be respectful while taking something that didn't belong to them. Emily didn't look surprised to see me. That was what hurt most. She stood there like she'd already won. Mom said it was handled, she told me. Handled. As if my absence had been a formality they no longer needed. That night after the police left my house felt hollow, larger, colder. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall until the light outside shifted. I told myself it was over. I was wrong. 2 mornings later, metal scraped against my front door. Soft at first. Careful. The sound of someone who knew what they were doing. I checked the camera feed and saw my mother standing inches from my lock. Calm. Patient. Beside a man with tools laid out neatly at his feet. That was when fear arrived. Not panic, not hysteria, fear with structure. I called 911 again. Saying the word mother out loud to the operator felt like swallowing glass, but the sound at the door pushed me forward. This time the response was different. Commands, drawn weapons. No casual warnings. The locksmith faced down on my porch. My mother pulled back, irritated, not ashamed. I stayed behind the door. I didn't open it. I didn't watch them leave. Something inside me had shifted beyond repair. A week later, while clearing out the last of Emily's things, I found the envelope. Thin, heavy, wrong. Inside were forms with my name, my address, my signature forged clumsy but close enough to be dangerous, language about long-term residence, permission I had never given. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. This had never been about helping Emily. It had been about taking ground. Quietly. Legally. Permanently. I called a lawyer the same day, and for the first time in my life I stopped trying to be reasonable. By the time I sat across from the lawyer, fear was no longer the loudest thing in the room. Clarity was. Nathan Brooks didn't rush. He didn't soften his voice or give me sympathetic looks. He read every page slowly. Fingertips resting flat on the desk, jaw tightening in a way that told me more than his words ever could. These aren't drafts, he said finally. They're structured. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. I watched the ceiling fan spin above us, steady, unbothered. What would have happened if these were filed, I asked. He didn't answer right away. That pause was deliberate. You could have spent years proving your own house was yours, he said. Eviction delays, residency claims, court dates, all while still living under the same roof. That was the moment my stomach dropped, not because of the paperwork, because of the realization that this wasn't impulsive. This was patient. This isn't a family misunderstanding, Nathan continued. This is attempted control through legal pressure. And silence would have been interpreted as consent. Silence. I had lived inside that word for most of my life. I nodded once. What do we do? Nathan slid the papers into a folder and closed it. We document everything. We block every possible angle. And we stop treating this like an emotional issue. Good. I was done with emotions. The changes started that same week. Every lock was replaced, not rekeyed, replaced. The security system was rebuilt from scratch, new cameras, new angles, motion alerts that didn't blink politely before notifying me. Access became singular. Mine. I filed formal notices stating no permission had ever been granted for residency. Not now. Not ever. Everything went on record, everything time-stamped, every silence accounted for. Then the letters started. From my mother first. They weren't apologies, they were explanations. Pages of them, written in her careful handwriting, looping and precise. She wrote about worry, about fear, about how she'd only meant to help, about how I was misunderstanding her intentions. I didn't respond. Emily tried next. Shorter messages. Sharper edges. You really called the cops on Mom. You've always thought you were better than us. I hope you're happy. I blocked the number. Nathan warned me they might escalate again. That control doesn't like being removed, that people who believe they're entitled to space don't surrender quietly. He was right. 2 weeks later, I was leaving work when I noticed a car parked across the street from my house. Same spot, 2 days in a row. Engine off, windows dark. I didn't confront it. I documented it. The third day, my mother showed up at my workplace. Not loud, not angry, calm, too calm. She stood in the lobby like she belonged there, purse clutched in both hands, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "I just want to talk," she said when I approached. "No," I replied. That single word felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "You're overreacting. You've always been sensitive." There it was, the old script. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I turned and walked back to my office. Security escorted her out minutes later. That night, I slept with the lights on. Not because I was afraid of her, because I was finally allowing myself to see her clearly. The hearing came faster than I expected. Administrative, cold, efficient. The forged documents were presented. The locksmith incident referenced. Police reports stacked neatly in a file that now carried my name. My mother sat across the room, spine straight, chin lifted. She didn't look at me. The ruling was brief. She was barred from approaching any property tied to my name, prohibited from filing, requesting, or facilitating housing claims involving me. Violations would carry immediate consequences. No dramatics, no speeches, just removal. Emily left the city within the month, quietly. No goodbyes, no forwarding address. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't need to. Distance handled what emotion never could. Weeks passed, then months. The house settled into itself again. The air felt different, not warmer, clearer, like something heavy had finally been taken outside and locked away. One evening I stood in the kitchen listening to the dishwasher hum the same sound that had greeted me the night everything began. This time it didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt earned. I realized then that calling the police hadn't been the moment I chose myself. Choosing myself was what came after. The paperwork, the silence, the refusal to explain what no longer required permission. Family doesn't get to claim your safety. Blood doesn't override ownership. And peace doesn't come from endurance. It comes from structure. And for the first time in my life, my house was finally quiet for the right reasons. Silence didn't come all at once. It arrived in layers. At first, it was just the absence of messages. No buzzing phone, no voicemail notifications stacked like threats. Then the longer stretches followed. Days where no one tried to explain themselves. Weeks where no one demanded I understand their intentions. The quiet felt unnatural at first, like walking into a room after a storm and not trusting the calm. I didn't confuse it with peace. Peace is fragile when it's built on avoidance. What I was building now was something heavier, something that could hold weight. Nathan warned me not to relax too quickly. People who lose access often try one last angle, he said, especially when they believe the story should have gone differently. He was right again. The angle came through paperwork. One afternoon, a certified letter waited in my mailbox. White envelope, official seal. My name printed too neatly across the front. I didn't open it right away. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it while the coffee machine hissed and clicked behind me. That envelope felt familiar in the worst way. Inside was a formal request for mediation. Not from my mother directly, but filed through a third party. The language was clean, polite, framed as reconciliation. A request to resolve misunderstandings regarding shared family resources. Shared. That word again. I forwarded it to Nathan without a response. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "They're testing boundaries," he said, "seeing if you'll step back into the conversation." "I won't," I replied. "Good," he said. "Then we document the attempt and move on." That was the pattern now. Everything became record. Every reach, every pause, every indirect push. The next attempt came through guilt. A relative I barely spoke to called one evening, voice thick with concern. "Your mom isn't doing well," she said. "She's barely eating. She doesn't understand why you're being so harsh." Harsh? Another familiar word. "I'm not discussing this," I said. There was a long silence on the other end, then a sigh. "She's still your mother." "I know," I replied. "That doesn't change what she did." I hung up before the conversation could turn. That night, I sat alone in my living room with all the lights off except one lamp in the corner. The house felt different now. Not invaded. Not watched. Mine. Every sound belonged to me again. The click of the thermostat, the hum of the refrigerator, my own breathing steady and unshared. For the first time, I let myself think about what almost happened. If I hadn't come home early, if I hadn't checked the camera, if I'd brushed off the first police visit as too extreme. I imagined waking up months later to court notices taped to my door, lawyers arguing over intent, judges questioning timelines, my own life frozen while strangers debated what should have been obvious. That thought made my hands go cold. I stopped romanticizing resilience that night. Survival doesn't mean enduring everything quietly. Sometimes it means ending things loudly enough that they can't crawl back in. Nathan finalized the last set of protections a few weeks later. Property records updated, alerts placed, legal barriers layered in a way that made future attempts visible before they could take shape. "This is as closed as it gets," he said. They'd have to be reckless to try again. Reckless had never stopped them before. But they didn't try. Instead, what followed was absence, real absence. Not the passive kind that waits to be broken, the kind that settles and stays. I learned what it felt like to move through my days without bracing for interruption, to unlock my door without scanning the room, to leave town without checking cameras every hour. Emily never reached out again. I heard through distant channels that she'd moved states, that she was staying with friends, that things were hard. None of that reached me directly, and I didn't ask for details. I wasn't curious. Curiosity is a door. I'd closed enough of those. My mother's name stopped appearing on my phone entirely. No blocked calls, no unknown numbers, just nothing. At first, that hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to accept when access was gone. So was the relationship. That truth stung. Then it steadied me. One evening, months later, I found myself standing in the guest room, the same room that had once been rearranged without my consent. The walls were bare now, no borrowed furniture, no temporary solutions waiting to become permanent problems. I repainted it. Neutral color, clean lines, no symbolism, just a reset. As the paint dried, I realized something quietly important. I wasn't rebuilding after damage. I was reclaiming after an attempt. There's a difference. Damage leaves scars you have to live with. Attempts leave lessons you can use. I didn't become colder after all of this. I became clearer. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from confusion. I stopped softening boundaries to make others comfortable. I stopped mistaking guilt for responsibility. Family didn't lose me that year. They lost control. And standing there, roller brush in hand, the room smelling faintly of fresh paint and solvent, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Ownership. The last thing to leave wasn't my mother or my sister. It was the habit of bracing myself. For years, I'd lived with a low, constant readiness, the kind you don't notice until it's gone, listening for footsteps that weren't there, anticipating questions before they were asked, explaining myself in my head before anyone demanded answers. That reflex didn't disappear overnight. It loosened slowly, like a muscle unclenching after being held tight for too long. The house helped. I finished changing everything. New locks, new codes, cameras adjusted until there were no blind spots left. Motion alerts tuned sharp, not jumpy, precise. The system didn't blink or hesitate anymore. It told me exactly what was happening when it was happening and where. Control feels different when it's yours. Paperwork followed. Dry. Exact. Nathan walked me through the final steps without ceremony. Deeds updated. Restrictions filed, notices acknowledged and archived, no room for interpretation, no space for misunderstandings. My mother faced administrative penalties tied to the second incident. Not dramatic, not cinematic, quiet consequences that don't fade with time, limitations placed, approaches forbidden, boundaries written in language that doesn't bend for sentiment. She never apologized. I didn't expect her to. Apologies require awareness. What she lost wasn't access to me. It was the ability to pretend she'd done nothing wrong. Emily disappeared from my orbit completely. No forwarding address, no indirect messages, no just checking in attempts routed through relatives. Whatever life she landed in, it no longer brushed against mine. Distance finished what confrontation never could. People ask sometimes if it hurt. Of course it did. But pain isn't the same thing as regret. Regret is wishing you'd chosen differently. I never once wished I'd unlocked that door again. Never wondered if I should have been softer. Never questioned whether calling the police had been too much. Too much is breaking into someone's home. Too much is forging permission. Too much is believing blood gives you rights over another adult's life. Weeks turned into months. The house settled into its real shape. Not staged, not guarded, lived in. I stopped flinching at unexpected sounds. The dishwasher humming no longer made my shoulders tense. The click of my phone screen lighting up didn't spike my pulse. Silence stopped feeling like something that could turn on me. One evening I hosted a friend for dinner. Just one, nothing elaborate. We talked about work, about travel plans, about nothing that required explanation or defense. When she left, I stood at the door and locked it behind her, feeling the finality of that sound. Click. That sound used to scare me. Now it grounded me. I thought about my mother's last words to me at the door, months ago. You don't get to do this to family. She was wrong. You don't get to do this because of family. Family doesn't rewrite ownership. It doesn't erase consent. It doesn't convert someone else's stability into a shared resource. I didn't lose a family. I lost an illusion. The illusion that patience equals virtue, that endurance equals love, that silence equals peace. Silence had trained them. It taught them how far they could go without resistance. Structure stopped them. That's the part no one tells you. Boundaries don't need to be loud to be final. They don't need speeches or forgiveness or closure conversations that never change anything. They need documentation, consistency, and the willingness to be misunderstood. There are still people who think I went too far. I hear it sometimes secondhand, that I chose law over love, that I escalated instead of working it out. Those people have never had their space taken quietly. They've never come home to intention disguised as care. They've never seen their name forged in ink meant to trap them. They've never watched someone they trusted stand patiently while a lock was picked. I don't correct them. Understanding isn't required for boundaries to hold. The last time I checked my security feed late at night, the porch was empty. No shadows, no figures waiting just out of frame. The light flicked on and off with nothing to reveal. I closed the app and set my phone down. That was it. No dramatic ending, no reconciliation scene, no final conversation. Just a house that belonged to me. Just a life that stayed where I left it. And the quiet knowledge that choosing yourself doesn't always feel brave. Sometimes it just feels necessary. And sometimes necessity is the sharpest clarity you'll ever have.